This Houston Public Television production of Houston Remember When is made possible in part through grants from the Fondren Foundation, the Shell Oil Company Foundation, on behalf of the employees of Shell Oil Company, and the Houston Endowment, a philanthropy endowed by Mr. and Mrs. Jesse H. Jones, with additional support from Knollwood Investment Limited.
Hello, I'm Steve Smith, your host for this presentation of Houston Remember When. In this program, we are revisiting an era that many of you may recall, a time when Houston was just coming of age.
Well, Houston was a small town. When I was born, the population was 30,000, and I was born on McKinney Avenue, and McGowan Avenue was the end of the city.
A time for the young.
There were hardly any cars. We played shinny out in the middle of the street under the street lights.
When life seemed a little less complicated, and entertainment was where you found it.
Hide and seek was one of my favorite games. You would play it with the girls, you know, they would hide and you would try to find them. Roller skating. You had to have a key to your roller skates because they were the metal type that you put your little shoe and everything, you put it on there and then you would tighten it up and it would catch onto your shoe.
There were no private swimming pools in those days. So Buffalo Bayou was one of the main places that us kids went skinny dipping.
Well, our city has changed, but the memories live on.
On Saturday, usually my dad would give me 50 cents. And we could go to the movie for a quarter and then go to James Coney Island afterwards and get hot dogs, and they were a nickel apiece.
That was a nice place because you could go there and get you a Coke in a Coney Island and spend 20 cents and go to the show. You still have 30 or 40 cents left.
I was a little girl, and my mother was just crazy about the movies, so we'd go to movies every time they turned around, you know, but we couldn't understand. They didn't speak, we just saw the pictures.
Full orchestras played to packed houses in those days, and frequently solo musicians provided entertainment and their own interpretation of the images on the screen.
A whole bunch of old movie houses, the ISIS and the Texan, and all those movie houses had silent movies.
Well, they just played anything that felt like playing, that they thought would be appropriate, or anything they knew. But that was an addition to the movie, you know. They played it while the movie was going on, or sometimes between the movie and the next showing. But, and they used to say, oh, she's just a piano player at the movies, you know, and they didn't think they were great artists, but some of them were.
Fred's great musical background and integrity. He could play for almost any scene, almost knowing, you know, what it was going to be before it happened. So he was never really lost to find a note on the organ to use. It was like a sing-song, and Freddie the music would be on the screen, and everybody, you know, the words would be underneath it, and everybody would have a great sing-song fest, and that was really a lot of fun.
Of course, in those days, the big stars were Douglas Fairbanks. Later on, his son Junior came along. Noah Berry. The first talkie was at the Kirby Theater, but it was a big deal to hear a talkie.
It was always great to go to the movies too, because in those days houses were not air conditioned. So in the middle of the summer it was wonderful to go to an air conditioned movie theater and be cool for a few hours.
A lot of times they'd have a good show on, and I knew if I got out of the theater I wouldn't get to see it. So what I did, I'd just go in and deliver something and then go in there and sit down and see this picture. And a lot of times it was real good. And I enjoyed it because I'd always have a good seat.
It was a Metropolitan, and they had a gentleman there who used to mimic all kind of birds. And his specialty was that by using bird sounds, he would also talk, and it would sound like a bird talking. I thought it was unusual. Of course, I was about 10 or 12 years old at the time.
The loaves in the Metropolitan were just beautiful. The lobby and the trappings, all the trappings of both theaters were beautiful.
I just recall that they were magnificent palaces. I particularly recall the Majestic because it was an outdoor, I would call it an outdoor Mediterranean-style garden atmosphere, and it was quite artistic.
These places all were made for live bands and were made for plays. They had a beautiful stage on them. They had little pockets of places for people to sit. The makeup was extremely gorgeous, a lot of gilding of gold, but they were very, very fancy.
The Lowe's was so nice. Well, they had some beautiful wall work, and it was beautiful. And the second floor had a whole about 50 by 150 balcony hallway. We walked into the theater, and it was beautiful. The movies did so much for downtown Houston because we had about 4 or 5 first-class movies uptown.
I mean, downtown was where all the action was. That was the place to go, especially on a date. You want to impress your date, you take them downtown. See, sort of live it up.
We would all of our friends would go downtown on Saturday to see each other and to socialize. We would start off at DRC's. They had wonderful ice cream sodas, and then we would go to the theater, and then we'd see the movie, and we'd come out and visit a little more and go into the other theater. And we would just spend the day visiting right there in those 3 places that were right next to each other. And it was fun.
When it came to the movies in the 30s and 40s, everyone knew the name of entrepreneur, showman, and theater owner Will Horwitz, especially if you were a kid.
The theater business was a very popular business, and then Hurwitz family were the pioneers of it in Houston.
Nobody called him anything but Mr. Horwitz. I never recall anybody calling him Will. He gave that kind of impression, but he was warm, he was friendly.
When I was a little kid, I lived not too far from the Horwitz theaters, which was the Ritz, the Iris, the Texan, and the Uptown theaters.
The Texan, the Iris, and the Ritz, that was where we went. Usually on a Saturday, and we'd take a nickel ride on the streetcar from the Heights right into town and see the show, and at that point my dad would pick us up outside the show.
Peanut Day. Mr. Horwitz would run an ad in the local newspapers, and if you cut the coupon out and brought it with you, why, you could get in the theater free, and you'd end up with a bag of peanuts and a soft drink.
Well, Peanut Day was a huge event for the city. It was in honor of his daughter's birthday. Her name is Ruth Iris.
It was in June of every year. He used to have a program where the coupons would come out in the newspaper. The coupons were for the bus, for peanuts, popcorn, and to go in the movies.
And my cousins and I would all grab each other by the hand, you know, and we would all go. We would come from Magnolia Park and get on that canal bus and go all the way downtown to see the movie, because that was a treat, a special treat.
Tin Can Day was a promotional idea of Mr. Horwitz and Mr. Canada, manager of his theaters. The idea was to collect the food for the poor. If you brought in canned foods, they would let you in the movie theater free.
So I remember at one time the Uptown Theater was offering free movies for people who would take some metal objects or whatever, you know. And I had that right on the bus, and I was carrying these rolls of steel straps, you know. And of course I lived in Magnolia Park, and I had to go all the way downtown. By the time I got over there, the time has already elapsed, you know, for the free movies. So I had to talk to the guy, you know. I finally convinced him, and he went ahead and let me in.
Will and Gladys Horwitz They had a beautiful summer or a home here in Dickinson. They had greenhouses and raised flowers. Mr. Horwitz owned theaters in Houston. He took his cut flowers to Houston and sold them around his theaters or down in the little alleyway underneath the theater.
The tunnel that connected the two theaters, the Texan and the Uptown, was the first in my memory of any underground tunnels in Houston.
The arcade was underneath the Texan Theater. It was downstairs, and it was a pretty cool place to go because they had all kinds of machines, pinball machines. They had video machines, what you call a penny arcade, where you could see a movie for a nickel or a penny or whatever. It was a matter of rotating the cylinder where you could see the movies, so forth. And of course they were silent, but you enjoyed looking at them. And there are certain movies I wasn't allowed to see. I don't know why, but at that 5-year-old, 10, 12-year-old, I didn't have a question. I just didn't do it. And mostly because I couldn't reach that high.
He was renowned for his beautiful Christmas parties that he held at the City Auditorium.
Well, the Christmas party in those days became quite an occasion for the city because not too many people had attempted to do this before. I can recall at least 12,000 kids at one time, which you got to remember back in those times, 12,000 kids showing up at a city auditorium was a pretty big crowd for the city of Houston prior to World War II. It wasn't that big a city at the time, so that was a tremendous turnout. You didn't have TV, so radio spots, a little publicity in the newspapers was how everybody knew about it. And nobody was ever turned away, whether they didn't ask for IDs, you had to swear that you were poor. You just came and enjoyed. They had music, they had drinks, they had cookies, and everybody got a package. Santa Claus was there. Quite an event for a little city at that time.
When I was, I guess, maybe 5 or 6 years old, maybe 7, I don't know. We were on our way out after they had given away the gifts. And I guess they gave the bigger bags to the people that needed them the most, you know. So I had a big sack with a bunch of toys in it. And on the way out, there was a family standing there, and they said, we didn't get anything. Would you share with us? So my mom says, yeah, we'll share with you. And I remember very vividly that one of the toys was a trumpet. And I wanted that trumpet, but the other kid said he wanted it. So my mother says, let him have it. So.
That was a wonderful time for a kid, and I had a wonderful time. Mr. Horwitz gave my father a pass, it said L.S. Davidson and Family, to all of his movies. And so Dad let me carry that thing around. And at that age and that time, I took advantage of that. I used to take 2 or 3 kids to the movie with me, and we got in free. That's what the pass said, L.S. Davidson and Family. So nobody ever questioned. Take my friends, go in, just walk right in with this pass. Except one time, I showed up with 9 kids, and the ticket takers says, I don't think your family's that big. You all look like you're the same age. And he says, I can't let you in, I have to get the manager. His name, I think, was Fred Canada. And he came downstairs, and of course he knew me. And he says, Sonny, you don't have this many brothers and sisters. And I said, no, sir, I don't. I said, but we're here, and we don't have any money. And, you know, he says, well, I'm going to let you in, but don't do this again. You know, it's just too much. So he let us in, but that next day he called my father and told him what happened. And I was threatened, bad news. He said, I'm going to take that thing away from you if you ever do that again. So I really caught the dickens over it. So we didn't do that anymore. I limited that friendship with all my kids that we ran around with to 1 or 2 or 3 sometimes. It was quite an experience, so I was very, very popular during those years.
What Mr. Will Horwitz did was used to bring in different movie stars. Like Johnny McBrown was here, Bob Steele, he was at the Irish Theater, to show the appreciation of the kids that used to support his theaters.
I can see him in my mind's eye now. He had gray hair the first time I saw him. Very stately person.
He was in the hospital, and he had a heart attack. And I believe he dictated a letter that was to have been read, or that was read, at the Christmas party. He died that day. He died on Christmas Day. But they did manage to read the letter to the people that were there, and it was a very sad day for the city of Houston when he died. It was a sad day for a lot of people.
I met Mr. Horwitz a number of years ago. He was a very well-respected man in the business. My boss was a man by the name of Al Lever. The Horwitz and Lever were big people in Houston. They, you know, in terms of, you know, everybody that was anybody in the public sector got a pass to the movies, and we had movie stars would come to town. There wasn't a month that went by that somebody didn't make a personal appearance.
The Ritz Theater later on became a Mexican theater also. And then we had a choice, either La Azteca or the Ritz Theater.
The Azteca, it was a theater. It was, I think, it was the first Mexican theater.
Well, it was a joint effort of the Saraga brothers, who were four, and the idea sprang, of course, with the help of Dr. Angel Leyva and Mr. Canales. They were successful business people.
I remember the theater as being very spacious in the inside. It had rows of seats on both sides. It actually, now that I'm older, I looked at it and I said, well, it was quite small. But at that time, being that I was small, it looked real big.
There's always some distraction, but your concentration was on what was going on in the theater. And some of these movies were kind of tragic, you might say, and they were brought out the tears in people, and you hear those sobbing back and forth, you know. And occasionally some baby would cry, and then you have to concentrate again to see what's going on. But it was a fun time. And the language itself, I mean, the language was Mexican. It wasn't Mex-Tex, it was Mexican. And it wasn't Spanish either. It wasn't Castilian Spanish, it was just Mexican. That's the only way I can describe it.
Starting in 1916, the Lincoln became the primary downtown theater for black Houstonians.
On Saturday, we would go to the Lincoln Theater, and we would see generally a serial, you know, picture in series. I recall one of the main actresses of that day was Pearl White, and then you had another one named Ruth Rowland, and maybe you've heard of Tom Mix, who would play in the Westerns. But it was always interesting because they would cut off, you know, at an interesting time, and you'd be anxious to go back the next Saturday to see how it came out.
My father was O. Peter Walsh Sr. Yes, he was the first black to operate a movie theater in Houston. The owners of the building wanted it for colored, which was called at that time colored people back in those days, you know. And he insisted on trying to operate it, but the owners said it was for a colored theater for colored, but they wanted it under white management. And he persisted, and they threw him out one time, but he kept going back. And so he said, well, OP, we're going to give you a chance. And from the very minute he started, my mother was in the box office, and he was in the taking tickets, and he had a projectionist. And from the very first day they started, he was kind of succeeded. And that's what was the very start of his Lincoln Theater.
Only at the Lincoln downtown, where you could see a movie and Pigmeat Markham and Red Fox and those type of people. That was the only place that you could see a show and a show, a live show and a show.
Tom Mixon and Buck Jones. Yeah, mostly Friday and Saturday was Western Day. Always showed Westerns on that day.
Price was right, 5 cents. And we used to pay, I used to cut a yard, get 15 cents. and I have a nickel to go see the movie. You know, that's what it was then. Johnny Mac Brown, John Wayne. John Wayne been here forever. And
on several occasions, he had children in free. Yeah, it was called Appreciation Day. Show the crowd the people that he appreciate their patronage, you know. And that was called Appreciation Day. And that kind of stuff kind of went over kind of big with the people, you know. He was really one for the books, I'm telling you. Yeah, he won for the books because he had a deep imagination. I mean, he had a deep vision about things. I'm not bragging on him because he's my dad, but he had a deep vision.
In those days, you had things delivered to the house. Phoenix Dairy had a contest to elect Phoenix Phil.
This just goes to show that Phoenix Phil practices what he preaches. Cottage cheese is greatly in demand just now, so Phoenix Phil puts on a demonstration to show just how Phoenix cottage cheese should be eaten. It is supposed to be taken inwardly. And remember, let Phoenix fill your cheeks with roses.
Where they would show these little advertisements all over Houston in the theaters then. In this contest, every route man got to choose one kid from his route. So they chose me, and they did this at the Tower Theater. And I remember going there, and must have been about 4 years old. And I remember Mother was there, and she had me in overalls, because Phoenix Phil wore little striped overalls. Anyway, they would call the kids up, get them, then they would introduce them. And Mother, being the mother that she was, said, when you get up there and they introduce you, be sure and blow me a kiss. So sure enough, got up there and blew Mother a kiss. Of course, the audience thought I was blowing them a kiss, and so they elected me Phoenix Phil. I think that's the way it went. I think for doing all this, so I got, I think, $5 a year supply of milk, which in those days, people didn't have much money, so it was really pretty good.
It's the berries. It really is the berries, says Phoenix Phil as he demonstrates how the best berries can be made even better by flooding them with Phoenix cream. This is just one more way to let Phoenix fill your cheeks with roses.
Stay tuned for clowns, carnivals, and trail rides when Houston Remember When continues. Remember when the circus and rodeo called Sam Houston Coliseum their home? When you were young, it was an experience you lived for.
We had two circuses that came to Houston, Ringling Brothers, Barnum and Bailey. But the big circus was the Shrine Circus. And it was an event that was kind of special to most of us in Houston because it was a locally sponsored event. And you know, we'd bring in the lions and the tigers and all the acts. It was, in the Coliseum, it was a 3-ring circus. You know, many circuses are just 1 ring. So there was something going on and people getting shot out of the cannon, and it was always some excitement. But just the Shriners themselves were an act. I mean, the Shrine has a lot of fun. And the guys with the red fezzes and the hawkers and things, it's an audience participation show when those guys are involved in it, and that's what made it kind of the event for me.
The circus? Well, of course we went. And we just thought it was unbelievably great, It was a mystery as well as an entertainment. And I never could understand how they could shoot that man out of that cannon. That was a big impression made on me. I think I was more terrified than impressed.
Well, we loved the circus. Mainly what I remembered were the men and women who would get on the horses bareback. I was so impressed that they would stand up and ride those horses around bareback.
We would go to photograph the circus every year at some of the events there, and we'd always find a nice elephant that was friendly. And they were friendly. They'd come up to you and eat out of your hand or slap you in the face.
The star was Frank Buck, and he used to go in this ring and put the animals through their paces and stuff, and then the thing that was most thrilling of all was that he would put his head inside the mouth of this lion, you know. You just wonder if he was going to get chopped off or that.
Things happen in circuses. It doesn't always work out. When somebody falls, you know, that when somebody falls off of the high wire, and it does happen, instantly the crowd screams and hollers because for an instant there you forget he's got a net under him. But these are things that they're excitement things. They're things that are part of Americana. You know, it's just something that, you know, if you don't go to the circus, you're missing out on a great deal in life.
At the circus, they had like a building, a model of a building, several stories high, of course in miniature, you know. And these dogs came out dressed with the slicks and the helmet, like a fireman. And they had these hoses, and they were out there trying to put out the fire. And then one of the upper stories, the window opened up, and there's another dog, lady dog out there. She's screaming, you know, for help. And this dog goes up there to rescue her and all that. It was very comical, very amusing. Yeah.
We used to live on McKinney Street. I had the City Hall as a playground. I had the Coliseum as a playground. And every time the circus and the rodeo came to town, I could go out there and just see it for free or take a look at what was going on. And every year we would have this one particular clown. He had a dog act. And he would come and ask permission if he could camp in our front yard. You would see him putting on his makeup, and he'd go down to the circus, perform, come back, cook his food, and that's where he stayed. Our payment was he would give us a little puppy most all the time. So after a while, we would end up with a puppy a year old, and then he would give us another one, and finally a lot of our neighbors ended up with puppies because of him coming into town. Now that's one of the best memories I've got of the circus.
In the 40s and 50s, rodeo stars like Gail Davis, Hugh O'Brien, and Rex Allen made their way to Houston for run-of-the-rodeo performances. But to most, the rodeo world revolved around Gene Autry, Roy Rogers, and Dale Evans.
Well, his Houston Livestock Show and Rodeo and the Shrine Circus were probably the biggest things that happened in Houston as far as the kid was concerned in the early days of my early days of Houston.
We went to the Houston Livestock Show and Rodeo, and when it was at the Coliseum when it started, and those were bad times then, and we could get in for 50 cents and stand up. For $1 you could get a seat and sit down, but lots of times we would go and for the afternoon performance and sit down, and then we would stay and stand up on the bottom floor and look through the wire and watch it. For 50 cents we could stay there and watch it. But we went every year up till the war years. We took our kids. That was a yearly outing that we went to. That was a big part of our life.
Gene Autry was the star, and I remember that the family that I had gone with had really good seats, and we were quite close up. And he rode around the Coliseum on his horse. Champion, I think it was his name. And it was so exciting because that was certainly the first movie star I ever saw in person.
Well, I know when Roy Rogers came to town, my brother went off with them. We were gone about a week, covering everything that they wanted at different places. And so we covered him a whole week. Well, they enjoy doing things for people, speaking to people and getting the little kid and hold them in their hand.
I suppose my fondest memories are of the rodeo, because as a child I always wanted to be a cowgirl when I grew up. And I loved seeing Dale Evans and Roy Rogers, and they always brought Trigger and Buttermilk, their horses. And I remember Gene Autry. And I just remember that at the end of the rodeo that they would ride their horses around the arena, and that all of the children would walk down to the edge, and we would shake their hands, and it was just, the rodeo was very personal in those days.
Stuck my hand out to try and touch him. I don't even know if I did or not, or if he shook hands, but I remember all of us standing up, the kids, you know, standing up trying to shake hands with him. But he rode all around, and it was pretty exciting because he was a big movie star in his day.
And when the announcer said, "And now, ladies and gentlemen, the king of the cowboys, Roy Rogers," and boy, Roy came running out there on his horse, and he got to the center of the stage, and he reared trigger back, took off his hat and waved at the crowd, and all of a sudden, my 4.5-year-old who is sitting on my lap is overcome by all of this excitement. And I am sitting there, and all of a sudden I am feeling what I hope I am not feeling, but I am feeling moisture all over my lap. Roy Rogers was too much for my 4.5-year-old son, and the excitement.
The first year, 1938, we had the Bill Hames Carnival.
But all the carnival and everything was laid out in front of the Coliseum. They would shut down like a couple of blocks and put all the Ferris wheels, everything in there. And I remember one particular time I wanted to go real bad. And I guess I must have teed my mom and dad off, because my dad finally said, "Look, just take him for a little while." So we went out there, and we were just going to go outside to the carnival. But I had a nickel. And as we were going by, they had these, I don't know what you would call them, where they would have a big wheel, and they would spin it, and it would hit a number, and you win a prize. Okay? So as I was going by, I remember that, or my mother says that I started crying, that I wanted to put my money on a number. What it was like a long table, and it had numbers, and you would put your money on that number, and then they would spin the wheel, and if it hit that number, you won. Well, I put it on number 7. And they spent the wheel, and I won a big basket of groceries. So here's me and my mother walking back with these groceries back to the house.
And the carnival was stretched out all over the streets. So once you arrived in that area, you knew that you were at an event. I mean, you were walking up to wherever you happened to park in downtown Houston. You knew that the rodeo was there. You knew it was there because as you're driving in, you could generally have this distinct aroma after about 2 days that came off of that area that only livestock can create. Livestock and mud and water, and it has a flavor of its own, you might say. And I say flavor because at times it got so good that you could almost taste it. And but you know, when you're a kid, you don't see these things.
It was a wild time, and we didn't go every year, but every other year or so we would go and dress up like a cowboy. And there were a lot of natural cowboys walking the streets of Houston at that time. So it was just another fun thing to do, and it was, at that time, I mean, the costs were tiny in relation to your income.
I remember the rodeo being very important in the days of our early childhood. All the children in Houston we used to get out of school. We had a holiday, and we all went to the rodeo downtown. I mean, we all went to the Saltgrass Trail Parade downtown.
The Saltgrass Trail. Charlie Geisdaner and Reese Lockett were all sitting around having a few drinks at the Court Club in the old Shamrock. My friend Reese Lockett, the mayor of Brenham, he had been on a trip and had gotten fogged in and had missed their appointment or something. And Reese rolled back and said, "Well, now I'll tell you one thing," said, "I ain't gonna go a mile that I can't ride my horse. I ain't going on any more errands." When Geisdaner heard him say it, he said, "Well, why don't you do something to help the stock show on a pre-show deal? Why don't you ride that horse from Brenham in here and back up your words?" One thing led to another, and Charlie Geisdaner, the advertising genius that he was, or PR genius, said, "That's it. We got to start a Saltgrass Trail. We got to revive the Saltgrass Trail." So the first Saltgrass Trail took out from Brenham with Reese Lockett, Pat Flaherty, Emil Warshak, the Mr. Marks' hired hand, and Mr. Emil Marks. But do you know that thing took off like gangbusters, and in mighty few years we had, the only trouble we had was too many folks on that trail.
When it got started, several people wanted to ride. This was the second trail ride, as I recall. And they wanted to borrow some horses from my father. And he lent them the horses on the condition that they would let me ride with them and take care of me. These were adults, and I was still a little young and rambunctious, and so I got to ride the trail and come down. Well, I tell you, my fanny was sore by the time we got here.
I'd been on a horse maybe 2 or 3 times in my entire life, and generally that was out on Main Street, you know, riding the ponies out there. So I said, well, I can't ride the whole time, but I'd like to come ride a day. I think I lasted about 3 hours. Then my remembrances were like some of the others that have come in. I think they strapped me to a buckboard because I had more pain and agony. And we got into Memorial Park, and of course we had the party there. And I guess as a teenager with all of that, I mean, this was party time. I mean, it was fun, the music and dancing and, you know, everything happening. And this was something that was just, you know, a kid's dream, you might say, particularly a kid that had not been around or exposed to it.
We were riding along in this drizzle and cold, and I was about half awake. And somebody cut in front of this stupid old horse I was riding, where I kind of jerked him up like that, and he just fell over backwards, and me on top of him. And I thought I did get loose from him. And I was laying there in the mud and the rain, thinking that I'd broke my back, feeling real sorry for myself. Somebody said, "Don't move." In a minute, Neil was riding, I think, the biggest horse I ever saw in my life. Neil was about this wide and about that tall. But he was all spread out on this old big horse. He came and parked that horse where they wouldn't run over me. He looked down at me. He was a great kidder. He looked down at me and he said, "Jim, you SOB. Some people will do anything to get off this trail." And here I was hurting like hell.
As a younger child, it was the event, going down for the parade. It was probably the biggest parade that, you know, it's always been the biggest parade Houston's ever had. When I was a kid, and you know, if someone had told me one day that I would be riding in the Houston Livestock Show and Rodeo Parade, I'd say, "You're crazy. There's no way." It's just beyond the dream of a kid. I mean, you probably had a dream, oh, wouldn't it be great to do this? But you don't have any really feelings that could ever happen to you.
Well, now we used to take the kids to the Fat Stock Show parade, and that was a big thing. We'd take them and park the car and let the kids sit up on top of the car and watch the parade go by, and all the horses and everything, you know.
Back in those days, it was rough and tough, and being on a horse in the parade is probably one of the most exciting things I ever did, because I remember rounding the corner on Main Street and going down Main Street, and the big buildings that were there then. It was just, you know, you look up and you see all this, and it's just an experience that it's hard to describe.
Houston was small enough that one time when I was in junior high, one of my friends was riding a horse. His father was one of the administrative people for the rodeo, and he just said, "Hey, come get on our wagon or come jump on my horse." And I just left my friends and jumped on his horse, and I thought, I'll get a ride home somehow.
You know, looking at it from the sideline and watching the horses, you're sitting on the curb, and I remember those days when I was sitting on the curb looking up at the big old horses and those big cowboys. Cowboys just seemed so big back in those days, of course.
The important part and the gratifying part of of the history of the Houston Stock Show is the realization that you never bet against Houston. Houston and its people are the most generous of any in the whole wide world. But it all stems back to the magnificence that is Houston, Texas, USA.
There is much more coming up as Houston Remember When continues. Don't go away. Through the decades, downtown was the heart of Houston. And during World War II, much of what happened revolved around the City Auditorium and its neighboring hotels.
My grandfather and my father were the founders of 2 hotels in Houston. The first one was the DeGeorge Hotel. It was built in 1913, and then later they went on to build in 1926 the Auditorium Hotel. Well, the Auditorium Hotel, it was actually across the street from the City Auditorium. The City Auditorium was there first. So that's how the name came about, the Auditorium Hotel.
In the basement of the Auditorium Hotel is a room which all of us grandchildren or great-grandchildren and my parents called the circus room. We never knew it had another name. And the reason we called it the circus room is because it was decorated in the circus theme. All over the walls were painted murals having to do with circus animals, trapeze artists, and all the whatnots that go along with the circus. And in the floor were 3 concrete rings delineating the theme of the 3-ring circus. And then on the structural columns were balloons in relief. It turned out that during World War II, the Houston Little Theater, which is the predecessor of our Alley Theater, and so they started what was called this Houston Stage Door Canteen downstairs, where our servicemen could be entertained. And the actors and actresses from the Houston Little Theater would serve these men.
And they had the canteens down there, and his Dewey Roussel was responsible for that, and it was a great joy for the boys that came in from their camp, from Camp Logan and from Ellington Field later on. She was a great, great person, a dear, sweet, precious person, and she was the first woman, I think, that was ever given a particular position that she has with the Post, and it was she who organized these kitchens and did so much work during the war to bring joy and happiness to the soldiers.
One story that Dewey Roussel told me was that Gene Autry at one point rode his horse into the lobby of the auditorium, and he rode it down the stairs. And he rode it down into the Stage Door Canteen. And Dewey's son asked Gene Autry if that story was true. Did you really ride your horse into the lobby of the Auditorium Hotel in Houston, Texas, and downstairs? And Gene Autry said, yes, I did.
The Ambassador Hotel was located on Fannin and McKinney. It was a great place to live, in my opinion, during that period of time. This was during wartime. This was in World War II, of course. There was great activity downtown. There was rationing, of course, of gasoline, sugar, and shoes also. Yes, so you could buy 3 pairs of shoes a year during World War II, and you were issued coupons to buy shoes.
On May the 30th, it was a Saturday, 1942, there were 1,400 volunteers that volunteered to replace the crew of the cruiser Houston that was sunk in February of 1942, a couple of months after the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor. And there was approximately 1,000 men that were lost on the cruiser Houston. And someone came up with the idea to ask for 1,000 volunteers from Houston to replace the crew, and they ended up with 1,400 volunteers. They were marched down in front of the Low State and Metropolitan on a block between Lamar and McKinney, facing the theaters, and were sworn in. It was very meaningful, and it was a big part of Houston. I don't think there was anyone in Houston that didn't know or kin or knew someone in that group of 1,400 men at the time. So it was a very meaningful to everyone present.
In the Second World War, when Ellington Field was started, I had charge of every party for every cadet that went through there. And I think it was something like 300 girls, married cadets, that went through Ellington Field. We had the dances at the Lamar Hotel. They had leased the ballroom for them to have a downtown club for the cadets. And they were very grateful, fine, fine boys. You see, when they were graduating, they had to go to their graduation balls, but they had to have a date. And they would call me in, they'd say sometimes as many as 25 or 30 of them didn't know any girls. So anyway, they'd call me and I'd say, do you want a blonde, a brunette, or a redhead? And they'd let me know, and I'd say, how old are you? And they would tell me, and I'd say, how tall are you? So I would do this to make them comfortable. And they had never seen these girls, and I had the loveliest girls in Houston on my list. One day I said, well, I've run out of redheads, you're gonna have to put up with a blonde or brunettes. I tried to make them as happy and give them as much pleasure as I could. It was a long war, I can tell you.
As you face the Auditorium Hotel from Texas Avenue, to the left of the lobby was the Auditorium Coffee Shop, and to the right of the lobby was the ticket office, the box office for all the wrestling matches and boxing matches, which were held at the City Auditorium. Boxing and wrestling were very important to Houston.
Whole families would come to the wrestling matches, and the children were great enthusiasts about what's going on in the ring, and of course they'd try it out at home the next day.
We had box seats in the old City Auditorium. And of course, Mother was always hollering for the good guy, and there was a gentleman sitting behind her. He had a foghorn or something that he kept blowing. He was for the bad guy. Mother turned around to him and says, don't blow that thing in my ear anymore, and you quit hollering for the bad guy. Well, 2 or 3, 4, 5 minutes later, he kept on. Mother stood up, took off her shoe, her high-heeled shoe, turned around and hit him in the head with it. It happened so quick. The whole group in the box was totally stunned. And she says, I told you to keep quiet. I will tell you, the fella never said another word the rest of the evening. It's a wonder she didn't get put in jail. It was unbelievable, funny.
Promoting the sale of war bonds spawned many fundraising events, but when oilman Hugh Roy Cullen, symphony conductor Ernst Hoffman, and wrestling promoter Morris Siegel teamed up in 1944, the result was a remarkable evening that added more than $7 million to Houston's war bond effort.
At that time, the City Auditorium, located on Texas Avenue, was the home of the Houston Symphony. The symphony performed on Monday and Tuesday nights. And then on Friday nights, there were wrestling matches. And so someone had the idea to combine the symphony concerts and the wrestling matches. The symphony orchestra would ad-lib extemporaneously the action that was going on in the wrestling ring. At one point during the concert, one of the wrestlers apparently did not like what was being played, so he left the ring and ran up to the stage and took the baton from the conductor and conducted a portion of the symphony concert. And that was part of the performance. It was widely covered, I guess, at the time.
The first time I went there, a friend of mine took me. They said, let's go to a wrestling match. And it was in 1943, it was during the war. And at that time, they charged 35 cents. First time I seen them guys get on the ring, he punched him in the mouth and the stomach and everything. I told my friend, I said, that man is going to kill him.
But it was kind of a serious business, really, when you get down to it. And they were grunting and groaning and throwing each other on their backs real hard. And it was an exciting thing. It was sort of like Roman days, I imagined. And we loved it. Could hardly wait for Friday nights to get there.
Oh, I used to go with my dad to the wrestling matches. And he was crazy about it. Every Friday night he was wrestling. He liked wrestling.
The gentleman with the long tights is a man named Dick Schickat, who had defeated, Jim Londos defeated for the world's heavyweight title. There is this young fellow named Bosch playing a head scissor, and here you see now with that fast and speedy getaway. This shoulder butt, and here is Schickat being pursued and mauled around by the shoulder butt, which was at that time one of the holes I favored. Here is a ride-em count.
Dick Schickat and Strangler Lewis and that bunch.
Actually, I met Jim at the wrestling matches. He was one of the top wrestlers in Texas at that time. In fact, shortly after I met him, he became the Texas champ. Jim's favorite hold, I guess, was the Killarney Flip. He named it the Killarney Flip, being from Ireland. And he was more a scientific wrestler, catch as catch can, and he was more of a counter wrestler. And he just was a good all-around wrestler.
These were athletes. These guys worked out and they did things and they tried, and you know, even if it's picked that this is your night to win, they didn't like it and they didn't give up easy.
Training was the whole secret to the whole thing. The best man that trained for that week, the strongest and the cleverest, he was going to be the one that would have his hand raised at the end of the match. But when Gorgeous George came in, television was beginning to show the matches, and the promoters seemed to want to work a show. Actually, Bob Hope was responsible for all this glitz and glitter that we have today. Bob Hope took a hold of Gorgeous George. He says, "You've got to have a gimmick for TV." So the two of them decided that they would dye his hair, curl it, use bobby pins, go in and atomize the ring and throw the bobby pins to the girls. And this is really how all of this funny wrestling started.
The main feature that night was Gorgeous George. And I had never been to a wrestling match before. Well, Gorgeous George won the match. And then he'd jump up and he'd flip his hair up into the air. He had blonde, long hair, really curly, and he had bobby pins stuck in it. And I got one of the gold bobby pins.
It's just amazing to me, in looking back over that, as to how big wrestling was in Houston. Wrestling was a very big event in Houston, and it was every Friday night.
I can remember everything that went on at the Coliseum was exciting to me because it was like a close-up, and I enjoyed the Coliseum very much.
I recall having attended one of the St. Thomas Mardi Gras events. It was quite an event, and it was nothing like we'd ever had in Houston.
We were to do this at the Coliseum. And the interesting thing, and I look back and it's unbelievable what we did, because we were just a little over 100 students, and we were expected to do some fantastic thing that was going to fill that Coliseum up.
I wore a chartreuse dress and chartreuse headpiece, and it had plumes on each end of it on an eyeglass frame, and then it had these elaborate jewels on it.
I can still remember getting there that night, most of us dressed in some type of Mardi Gras costume. And it was just throbbing with excitement. But we got there and we all took our posts to usher. And when I first walked into that Coliseum, there were all those thousands of empty seats. And it seemed like the next time I looked up, they were packed. Everywhere you could look, there were people, and over 15,000 were there. And I don't believe there are 15,000 seats in the Coliseum. But I think the Mardi Gras that stands out in the minds of most of us is the third one. That was in 1952 when Bob Hope came to be our king. And it was unbelievable that Bob Hope was really going to come. The night of the Mardi Gras, I was somewhere up in that mass of people, and the master of ceremonies said, "And now here's Bob Hope." Someone opened the curtain, and no Bob Hope. And I thought, oh my God, he didn't come. Well, it just took him a while to get from his dressing room. And when he appeared, I just could not believe he really was here.
I guess it would be that all of our students, we were so close, working together, and it was an experience that a lot of us had never had. And I don't know. It was just a great time. It really was.
Downtown has always been the place to go for important social events and special occasions.
There's a lot of opportunities here. There are a lot of great people here.
Pilgrim Temple, I think, was built about the time that I was coming out of college. I graduated from Howard University in 1926, and I'm thinking that the Pilgrim Temple was built about that time. It was a beautiful building in our estimation.
It was built by a fraternal organization by the title of Progressive Order of Pilgrims. But it was a very successful fraternal organization at that time, and they wanted their own facility, their own building, and they engaged one of Houston's best-known architects at that time. I think he was the best-known, Albert Finn. I came here from Chicago, where there were a number of buildings on the south side that were owned and operated by people of my own race. But I was pleasantly surprised that this building, such a handsome building, such well designed, and the appointments and everything was equal to anything that you would find in Chicago, New York. There were physician offices, attorneys, insurance companies. The NAACP had offices there. There was one labor union. Now on the fourth floor, it consisted largely of an auditorium, and it was a covered entire building there that would accommodate, I would say anywhere from 600, 700, 800 people in set up and ran, because there were not only meetings held up there, but when the fact of it is that auditorium almost was the social center of Houston.
And I think the reason we were so carried away with the Pilgrim Temple is that they had a dance hall on the fourth floor, and about that time all of the fraternities and sororities were being established in Houston, and that was the big event every year. Their annual ball was at the Pilgrim Temple.
Fraternities and sororities had their own dances, but there were public dances, and such bands as Duke Ellington, Cab Calloway, Erskine Hawkins, or I'm thinking about some of the bands at that time, would come here and play for those dances. And of course they would attract a big attendance, and you couldn't hear them anyplace else but there at that auditorium. So we would be hanging around there absorbing that music. If we weren't dancing, we were absorbing the music and enjoying, of course, all of the crowd there. Mm-hmm.
Well, those were the dances of the 20s. And the flapper girls, and they had on their little short dresses with the beads all over them, and they would just be dancing away.
Some of the local promoters, Negro promoters, like Don Roby, he was the biggest promoter here for Negro social affairs, dances, and entertainments and all, would also have them at the Pilgrim Building.
When they started, all dances would end about 12 or 1. And when they started playing, there's no place like home, you would really be sick. You didn't want to leave the Pilgrim Temple.
Well, one of the big social events of the year was the annual debutante ball, sponsored by a ladies' organization known as the Smart Set Club. And this was the sort of the coming out of a young Negro girl who had, well, some had finished school, others were still in school, and they were the daughters of prominent families here. And this was their introduction to adult social life.
And they would present them in their long white formal, and the parents would be with them. And more than likely, the girls would have an escort. And then Mr. Provost would capture those activities, but then he would also take candid shots of the debutante with her date and the debutante with her family. It was always a family picture taken at an event.
At that particular time, you would have a little booklet with all of the dances lined up. And the young men would come and get their name on your list, you see. Every dance had what piece of music was going to be played. If it was a waltz and a young man wanted to dance with you, you put his name down. So as soon as you got through dancing with one young lady and the music started again, he'd leave that young lady and run and find the one that he had signed up with. And I thought that was kind of unique.
It served so many different kinds of functions, social affairs, meetings of large organizations, dinners, debutante balls, proms. We could just go on. And to me, that's fascinating that a building that was constructed primarily for a fraternal organization and for offices, and yet it was the center of the social and community life of Houston. It was a handsome structure, well designed, first class in every respect, and I guess that's the reason why it had such an attraction.
Doug Prince and Glenn McCarthy making their marks on our fair city as Houston Remember When continues. We'll be right back. Remember when car hops and the opening of the Shamrock Hotel put this city on the map? It was a time when Glenn McCarthy and Doug Prince brought fun and excitement to Houston.
A normal date for a teenager in those days was to go downtown to the movies, then walk back, get your car, and drive out to Prince's Drive-In and have some French fries and a Coke or something before you went home. That was a normal teenager date in those days.
Oh yes, of course. That was the place to go if we were going to have a hamburger. Yes, indeed. And then they had the car hops, you know, that took care of us. So when we got hungry, that's where we would go. And we thought we were in high heaven then, sure enough.
Our dad started in Dallas in 1929. So he opened up a one-man hamburger stand. People would pull up at the curb, so hence the term, I guess, curb service. And he would go out to the car, take the order, go back inside, cook the hamburgers and make the milkshake or what it was, and take it back and out and serve the car. And he came down to Galveston on a holiday, and coming through Houston, and he saw Main Street in Houston, and he said thought he'd never seen a street like that. Of course, in those days, I guess Houston was a one-street town. So he came down and opened up a drive-in at 4500 Main Street. And that was the first Prince's in Houston. That was in 1934.
Well, Prince's Drive-In was, it was the first drive-in type thing where the waitresses brought a tray out to the car and they hooked it onto your car and you ordered a hamburger and a Coke or something, but the thing you went to look at was the girls. They had on short skirts, and you really weren't too interested in the hamburger. You were more interested in looking at those girls.
Well, this cousin of mine, I hadn't seen him in maybe a month. It was a beautiful sunshiny day, and so I said, let's go out to Prince's and get us a cold beer. So that's exactly what we did, and I had my little camera with me, and that pretty little girl came up, and I took that little picture.
Well, some of them was pretty good. Some of them got my eye once or twice. But that's part of the business. Because, you know, they put on a show, well, you put on a show too. And they knew if they treated you right, you'd tip them good.
Well, when he was interviewing the ladies for car hop positions, they would have to raise their dress above their knees to show that they had good legs. And but today, you know, you wouldn't dare do anything like that.
Car hops in the 40s were a really glamorous deal, and we've had a car hop that worked for us that got covered in a deal called Look magazine and also in Life magazine, and as did one of our competitors.
They had a bunch of pretty hostesses that some of them, I remember one, but I don't remember which one it was, but they even had roller skates on.
They were on roller skates, but I'm not sure about that.
Do you ever remember roller skates? I don't remember
No, I don't think we ever
never had roller skates. But people remember the Prince's car hops on roller skates, but in reality, we never had any roller skates.
You would drive up and they would take your order and bring you your food, hamburgers, French fries, and sodas and malts and other soft drinks.
And I can remember the drive-in on Main Street even had a cigarette girl that had a tray with a strap around her neck, and she would go around from car to car selling cigarettes. So he was a real showman. When I was about 5 years old, and like I said, my dad would do anything for publicity. So they had this monkey called Chico the Chimp that was, you know, a trained chimp, and he had a handler, and he went around and did different act things. But they put me in a little kiddie car and had a rope on it, and they pulled it up to the curb right in front of the drive-in. And then Chico the Chimp came out with a regular car hop tray, and they had him dressed up in a little princess uniform they'd made for him with boots and a little short skirt and a hat. And of course, this thing came out with a tray with a carton of milk with a little bottle of milk on it. Would sit it there. And of course, you know, my problem is that, you know, I was smaller than the chimp. He looked like a gorilla to me. It scared me to death. And of course, then the chimp would get all excited and he'd grab the milk and start drinking. So.
Prince's and Stewart's, the drive-ins. It was a real lot of hot rods on Saturday night. One way to show off your car, you know, go out there Saturday night.
I had a sports car when that became a very popular thing. So one of the things we would do is we would start at Prince's on Main Street. And a whole group of us, you know, 30, 40, 50 kids, all in their sports cars. And then we would drive slowly down Main Street and turn right and go to the other Prince's. And after we cruised, if you will, the drive-in, then we would turn around and come back and go to the other Prince's. I mean, it was a driving back and forth.
So you double date in a family car and triple date in some cases. My friend Leroy, he had a Model A Roadster, which had a rumble seat in the back, and that was always a trip.
We would go out on double dates and hang out at the Princess Drive-In and eat the curlicue French fries and the malts, drink the malts, and sit in the convertible and talk till 1 or 2 in the morning, just hanging out at Prince's.
In the 40s, he had a Cadillac that actually had neon on it. I mean, it had Prince's, you know, Fit for a King on the back, and it had Prince's on the side, and you know, so I mean, it was a yellow Cadillac sedan, about a 1940 model or something, and it was Yeah, so he would try to promote anything, you know. A friend of his had an airplane. They got him to land. It was like a little Piper Cub. They got him to landed on Main Street, taxi up to the drive-in on South Main and OSD, and had one of the car ops go out with a tray and wait on the guy in the airplane. In fact, he went and bought right when the war ended in 1940, he went and bought a yacht over in Louisiana, brought it to Houston, pulled it out of the water at Greensboro, trucked it overland out on South Main.
But this was a huge yacht. And I recall watching that being placed on the property. They brought it in with enormous trailers and had to cut all the aerial lines, the electrical and everything, and they parked that thing and built a platform for it, and it became a tremendous place to go to not only have dinner, but to dance and party.
It was like a moat built around it, and then they sprayed the water up on the side of it to look like water.
If you went out there on a foggy night and you saw that yacht and all the floodlights on it, you would think you were lost. You must be in Galveston or someplace, but it was a beautiful thing. Called the North Wind's what the name of it was.
You know, the yacht was primarily a spot you would go for oysters and shrimp. Yeah, I went there, you know, but when I first came to Houston, oysters and shrimp were not my bag. I was an old Memphis, Tennessee vegetable guy, you know. I'm talking fried corn and beans and butter beans and onions, you know, and oysters just were not my bag. So I was not real big at that time at the seafood places that served and specialized oysters and shrimp. I had to overcome the little boy in me about, yeah, I don't like the way it looks, you know. But I did. I like them both now very much.
Then we decided, well, we weren't making any money, and we said, well, I guess he decided we better go back and do what we know how to do, so we became the Yacht Hamburgers. So we opened the thing up, and I remember he came up with a promotion, and, you know, it's like rolled prices back to the 1940s, and we had 10-cent hamburgers and 5-cent root beer, and we had the lot just jammed with people, and had a traffic jam down Main Street for about a mile with people waiting to get in to get a 10-cent hamburger. And probably that was the days the hamburgers were probably 60 cents or 50 cents then. I can remember going out with my dad and saying, well, I'm going to go count cars. And I'd say, okay, well, I want to go rodeo. So I'd hop in the car. We'd go by our competitors and count how many cars they had on their lot. Then we'd go to our place and count our cars and see, if we were beating the competition and everything. So it was a deal you were just kind of, you were involved in it all the time and everything. It was just part of our life and everything.
Prince's, of course, I think we all knew where it was and loved their hamburgers up to the time that the last one closed down. We were there to get our last hamburger.
A lot of people went to, down on Main Street, 4500 Main. When that was there were a bunch of big oak trees behind the deal. And for years you'd see articles where different executives around town would say, I courted my wife back under those trees. That's where we would go when we were getting ready. We were dating, and I asked her to marry me back there. So it was. There were a lot of older Houstonians have some good memories of those places.
In the views of many people, the opening of the Shamrock Hotel changed Houston forever.
I recall driving out South Main, what is now Main and Holcomb, and one of my cousins pointing out to me that this is the place where Glenn McCarthy is going to build a hotel. It's at that time it was really out in the country. One wondered when all the other hotels were downtown why anyone would want to build a hotel several miles from downtown Houston.
I asked him that question one time. Why did you come so far away from everything else? He says, well, I own that property. And he owns some property across the street on Main Street too, And that's why he built a hotel on it, because he owned it.
There were times that my dad took me up to the top of the Shamrock when there were when it was under construction. I didn't like that because I don't like heights, but he didn't like them either, and so we kind of hung on to each other. But and we didn't go up there that much because I know he didn't like being up there that high. But it was, again, unusual to stand on the top of that structure and look around at a 360-degree panoramic view, and you could see downtown. Other than that, it was just out in the country and saltgrass prairie.
There wasn't enough traffic on Holcomb and Main when the Shamrock was built. It was a little small dirt road. And the city, the way I understood it, the city didn't want to they said there's not enough traffic there. So I think Mr. McCarthy bought the traffic lights and stuck them out there.
Then they had a contest to name the Shamrock originally, and nationwide. And they, there were a number of them that came up with Shamrock. I think there were 10 or 11 that posted the name Shamrock. That's the way it occurred, is because of the winners of the contest named it Shamrock.
Mr. McCarthy was a very unusual individual, and by reputation, you know, he was a very vibrant, gregarious man. And I guess if you were to, wildcatter was probably a word that was invented for Glenn McCarthy. If you were to think about a wildcatter oil man, he was it. Rough and tumble, you know, ready for a fight, ready to get into something. Entrepreneur is a good word to use, but he just, you know, he'd get out there and put his money where his mouth was and get right in there and do it.
He was a man of powerfully positive thinking. He was almost possessed, single-minded. If he said he was going to do something, come hell or high water, he's going to do it.
A day before the opening, that pool was maybe half finished, and Glenn wanted it finished. And they must have hired 500 people and finished it through the night the next day. And the pool was open.
I was at the opening of the Shamrock Hotel in 1948. It was very exciting with the movie stars. I remembered Sonia Henney and Dorothy Lamour, and they were so glamorous, and everyone there was glamorous. They were all dressed in beautiful dresses, beautiful ball gowns and jewelry. It was very cafe society. It was, but there were all the wealthy people in Houston were there.
They had a tremendous crowd, and there were several all men, 20 or 30 of them, that were waiting in line to the maitre d' trying to get a table, and the place was packed. So the maitre d' saw me, and I was way behind the all men, and so he kind of called me over with his hand, and he told me to come around the side. So when I get over there, he said, "I'll take care of you." So he told 2 waiters to go get a table from the kitchen, and they did, and they brought a table out and put it in the aisle for my future wife and I, and we were able to have a wonderful view of the show that evening. But I do remember the all men all saying, "Who in the hell is that? Who in the hell is that?" At the time, I was only 23 years old, so I think I stirred them up a little bit.
It was crowded, and a lot of people were very, very thrilled. And Glenn McCarthy was a gentleman, and he would go among all the people and greet them and tell them how happy he was that they could be there at the Shamrock.
Opening night of the Shamrock was chaotic. They had, the management of the Shamrock has sent out, I think it was 3,000 invitations. They didn't believe that there would be that many people in Houston show up with tuxedos on because Houston was still a pretty small town. And what happened was that about 15,000 guys showed up with tuxedos on, and they didn't know who to keep out and who to let in, and it was utter chaos.
Glenn McCarthy brought all of his friends from, he brought them here himself, these movie actors and actresses, and they gave me a suite to stay in while I was there because I was going to sing, but I never was able to get up to the stage to sing, so I never did sing. at the opening.
Dorothy Lamour was singing the night that the Shamrock opened. And then with this sound broke, and then the lighting system broke. And I remember Dorothy Lamour coming to sit at our table just crying. She was just weeping because it had unnerved her so terribly.
She couldn't perform. She couldn't get her voice up over the noise that was coming from the audience. It was unfortunate. They survived it, and I guess it was a wonderful occasion for Glenn McCarthy to open the Shamrock like it did. Tremendous crowd, just a tremendous crowd, and the noise was unbelievable. But I never did get to the stage to sing, so they didn't miss anything.
When Glenn McCarthy built that hotel, he didn't spare the dollars. Shamrocks all over the place. Shamrocks right down the middle aisle on the carpet, all over the place. Beautiful hotel.
And when you walked in the lobby and you looked at that life-size portrait of Glenn McCarthy with his arms folded, it was as if to say, you better have a good time while you're here, because I'm here to see that you do.
And the Shamrock was one of the hubbubs of social activity in Houston for years. I remember the Emerald Room, the ballroom, and having many, many dinners there. I remember the Court Club and seeing entertainers there.
You realize that at the Shamrock Hotel, Frankie Lane, who is one of the top singers in the world, hey, Frank Sinatra played there back in the early days. And Patti Page was another big favorite.
But the Shamrock was the place to go if you wanted to really impress somebody. It was of course they had first-rate entertainment, and the food was excellent. Of course they had a great pool also. They had an Olympic pool there. Well, I remember one time they were rehearsing for a water show. They had a motorboat. I mean, that's how large the pool was, where they could actually have some water skiers behind a speedboat, and they were rehearsing while we were there. It gives you some idea how large the pool was.
I remember the water ballet dancers who would put on their performances, say one day a week during the summer.
And they do some very fancy work, things that you'd see on the movie screens in Hollywood. And I used to dive, did quite a bit of diving and dove off that extremely high board. Used to do a thing called gainers off of it, and on one occasion I hit flat and knocked the wind out of me, and it was a hard thing to go back up and come off that board again. It was a very scary thing.
Well, it was really nice because being able to go swim at the Shamrock pool really made it easy to get dates, because girls really like to go down to the Shamrock pool.
Yeah, that pool was ringed with like cabanas, which were little tent things, and you could so you kind of release those. So our dad had one, so we could go out there and use the cabana. Yeah, it was quite a lifestyle.
Yeah.
It was almost normal to go around the pool and see Dorothy Lamour or Gene Tierney, Hedy Lamarr, Clark Gable. Those people were there, not together every day, but it was not unusual to go out there and see someone that it was a famous movie star, or the ex-president, or it was kind of the place to be.
One of the features of the Shamrock Hotel, and I don't know whether it was by design or accident, but probably design, there was the big triangle out front. And because of the nature of McCarthy and always creating something that would focus on bringing people to the Shamrock and the excitement and things and keeping it part of the community, events would occur out there where that triangle would be the center focus with the hotel in the background. For years, 4th of July, it was the 4th of July extravaganza, because we had the fireworks out there, and then it would fireworks over Main Street and Holcomb Boulevard, and then the Shamrock in the background, and that was where, thousands of people would gather to watch fireworks. And that was an experience that I think in the earlier years that was a major event for people in Houston.
The Shamrock was so beautiful and so many people loved it. And so I've talked to Faustine about it, Faustine McCarthy, whose husband was Glenn McCarthy. And it was just so sad when they really closed down the hotel, because it was really a landmark and we felt like nothing could take its place, and frankly, nothing has.
I said to Glenn having lunch one day after the hotel was going to be torn down and everything, and I was still there, the last one there. And I said, they're figuring on bombing this thing, you know, putting bombs in there and blowing it. He looked at me and smiled. He said, they bomb this hotel. Half of Bel Air is going to go with it. Because it was made out of cement and steel. You know, that's the way he built it. And he said, half of Bel Air is going to go with it, he said. But I think that kind of hurt him a little bit when they tore it down, but I'm sorry they did anyway.
The Shamrock really was Glenn McCarthy's life. He put everything into it. He did it in a grand way. You know, a lot of people look down at Glenn McCarthy. They said he was a brawler. I didn't look at Glenn McCarthy as a brawler. I looked at him as a man who stood up for his rights. He wasn't going to take any guff off of anybody. He was the biggest thing Houston ever had. And when I saw that hotel go down, I knew that that was, it was almost like his monument gone. It was the grandest. And it just was a monument to Glenn McCarthy. I think he was a fine, fine man.
I'm Steve Smith. Thank you for joining us, and may all your memories be pleasant ones.
This Houston Public Television production of Houston Remember When is made possible in part through grants from the Fondren Foundation, the Shell Oil Company Foundation, on behalf of the employees of Shell Oil Company, and the Houston Endowment, a philanthropy endowed by Mr. and Mrs. Jesse H. Jones. With additional support from Knollwood Investment Limited.